Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of A Better You. My name is Joshua Nugent, and today I'm going to be discussing something a little different. Normally when I record these episodes, usually the last two that I had a topic in mind, and I usually record it in one take. And I try not to edit too much of what is being said because I feel from the feedback that I've gotten, and also just not wanting to tamper with too much of what's being said and shared. So typically I've been releasing these episodes on Wednesdays, and I was having a hard time coming up with an idea for the episode. I had a couple ideas in mind, but nothing was really like sticking. There was nothing I really wanted to talk about, like that was really jumping at me. And finally it hit me where I wanted to share something that's very near and dear to my heart, something that I want to share with you all, and it's actually a piece of literature that I'm going to be talking about, and basically just talking about this piece of literature and what's my connection to it, how I stumbled upon it, and what it's meant for me. So the piece of literature that I am talking about today is a manga series, actually. It's a manga series called VagaBond. Now, VagaBond, for those of you who don't know, is a manga that is basically following a real-life person, Miyamoto Musashi. For those of you who don't know who he was a samurai who lived, I believe, could be getting this wrong, but off the top of my head, had to be around the 13th or 14th century in Japan. And he was someone that he became famous for challenging a bunch of different masters of different styles of like swordsmanship, and he never lost a duel. So that was his claim to fame. And he actually wrote a book. There's a real book called The Book of Five Rings, and he talks about how, basically to sum up that book, is just the gist of how swordsmanship and spirituality connect, which is actually very interesting given what he's actually doing. So he would challenge people to duels, he would defeat them, and then he'd move on to the next master and challenge them. So VagaBond is essentially a manga series that follows Miyamoto Musashi and his journey from a very young age to eventually, when he becomes older. So this series I stumbled upon. This was around the time I was living in sober living. And I remember one day I went to this comic shop. I believe it's Newberry Comics, and this store sells like various like geeky stuff, like mangas, or like, they sell like music records. They sell like mangas you could buy and read. They sell like all these cool little like toys and stuff. So it's like a pretty nerdy shop. And I remember one time I walked in with my friend, and I saw this big book, and I saw like the number on the side of it. I saw the number 1, and it had this gentleman holding a wooden sword on the side of the book. And I was, flipping through the pages, and, at the time I wasn't really reading too much manga at that point. And I decided, you know what? I haven't read manga in a while. This looks kind of interesting. It looks like it's about, like samurais and people sword fighting. I can get behind that. So I bought the first one, and I read into it, and each day I would read it and read more of it and more of it, and pretty typical. There's no magical element to it or anything. It's just depicting that time period of Japan. So I keep reading this book, and I'm invested. So I continue to, each passing week I try to buy the next volume, and these are pretty big books. The one that I'm holding in my hand currently, I don't see any page numbers. Not that mangas actually have them, but it's a pretty big book. If I had to guess how many pages, I would say maybe close to 500 pages. And, there were 12 books like this. There were 12 books, and some of these books, they're pretty hard to come by. I had to order them from stores outside the country. So some of these were pretty hard to find. But I continue reading them, and and I start to see the spiritual aspect to it, which was kind of crazy to think about. Like, I bought this book expecting samurais fighting each other, and what turns out to be is actually a man's spiritual growth and his spiritual journey. So, not to really spoil too much of the story, because I really recommend people to read this, because the art style to it, just the amount of details that go into a page that the author, because the man who made it, and I'm so going to butcher his name, Tahiko Inui, he wrote the story, and he also drew everything. And the amount of detail that goes into a page is absolutely mind-blowing. And just the careful attention to details, and the dialogue, and just the character arcs, certain characters, and when you see them in the beginning versus how you see them in the end, it's beautiful. It's masterfully crafted. It's one of my favorite mangas I've ever read, and honestly a very important spiritual literature that I've read, because there's so many different aspects to spirituality that I was unaware of at the time, and still to this day. And one of the biggest things that I've learned from reading this book, from reading this manga series, I should say, never judge a book by its cover. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it is so true, because, from speaking for myself, I've gone through a huge part of my life basically judging something based off of what I see on the outside. I almost never take the time to try to put myself in the other person's position and try to see things from their perspective, or maybe what's going on underneath, because sometimes people do certain things to protect themselves or to protect themselves from others, and this book does such a good job at showing that journey, showing the journey of this main character. And also in a way, when I was reading this, I was also going through, sobriety, and I'm still on the journey, on the path, but this was like early in my sobriety when I was reading this. So in a way, I could connect to the character because he was transforming, trying to become someone that was a master at his craft, right? But also trying to create his own path and his own journey and not necessarily follow the norm. And in a way, that's what I'm doing with my journey. And I'm trying to walk my path, find my place as the main character was. And as you're reading this story, the main character comes across a monk. And in my opinion, I think this monk is one of the best characters in the whole story. But this monk comes across Musashi throughout the story. And every time he sees Musashi, he sees a totally different version of him. And each time he sees him, he starts to understand the growth. He starts to understand and possibly learn from him what he has to, what he can learn. Because Musashi is just a samurai who's dueling people and killing people. And this character who's a monk, right? So, when you first see him, he's, he can come across as arrogant and he can come across as rude. However, he's just very honest and he sees the humor in things. And he almost exploits people's I want to say perspective on life, but like their seriousness. He breaks it because of how playful he is. And the few times that he has encountered Musashi throughout the story, the first time he encountered him, he was a bloodlust, like someone that just wanted to kill people just to kill people. And he felt like he was going to die at a young age and he didn't care. And to see him grow from that to someone that wants to be a respected warrior and respect the craft of swordsmanship, there is a few lines in the book that I would love to share because they're just so profound and they resonate so deep in my heart. And one of my favorite lines when Musashi is, when they're walking along a certain path together and Musashi's talking about his thoughts. And, he's telling him that my thoughts are wicked. These are the things, these are the things that I think about. And, with like the swordsmanship and the killing and, all these different things in my past. And, the monk tells him, your thoughts aren't wicked. They're perfectly natural feelings. You think these feelings go against the way of the warrior, but they only get twisted and bent out of shape when you repress them and try to contain them. And just taking out the warrior aspect when he says the way of the warrior, right? and we apply it to what's current, right? Like, I feel like I spent such a long time believing that I was a bad person because of what was going on in my mind. And the thoughts that would come up would be horrible. I would always think growing up that that my thoughts were no good. And on the inside, I felt bad, but I never spoke about it and I never shared it with anyone. But deep down inside, I always felt like I was a bad person for the thoughts I was having. And to this day, sometimes that does happen. Sometimes that happens where I think of something and then like that, like, oh no, like I'm a bad person for thinking this, but they're not bad. Thoughts aren't necessarily wicked and evil. Sometimes some random thought comes to mind and I try to remind myself, listen, the thoughts are going to happen. They're going to pop up whether you like it or not. It's what we do with the thoughts. That's what matters. When we put energy behind a thought, that could be a very good thing or a very bad thing. Because if our intention with a thought, right, let's say we have a thought and it's to help someone, right? We have the thought and then we start to think about it. We start to fantasize helping someone, right? And then we actually start to put effort into it and start thinking, okay, this is how I want to do it. This is my plan for it. And you spent time putting in the effort, trying to plan it out. And then finally, you execute your plan. And it's a beautiful thing, You took the time to think about it, plan it, and execute it. And you made some people very happy in that moment. But the same thing could go for thinking about something wicked, something bad. Like you could have the bad thought, but when you put energy, when you put effort into furthering the thoughts, and you start to entertain it and you start to push it, that's when things aren't necessarily good, And that to me resonated so much, when I first read that, because that made me think like all the times that I was getting high and all the times that I was hurting people, like the reason why I did those things was because I entertained it. I put effort into the thought, and that's how I was when I was a teenager and early parts of my adulthood. Was I got a thought in my head and I didn't think about it. I didn't think twice. I just did it, and it didn't matter who got hurt. It didn't matter who it affected. I did it because I wanted to do it, because it gave me something. It gave me a sense of identity. It made me feel good about myself, and I didn't care who I hurt. And and going back to what he said, you think these feelings go against the way of the warrior, but they only get twisted and bent out of shape when you repress them and try to contain them. Like that's another important part too, is like for some people, maybe when they get a thought in their mind, like me, I would get a thought in my mind and then I would just do the thought. I wouldn't even give it like a second. I wouldn't analyze it. I wouldn't say no. I would just jump on it, and a lot of the times it was not to someone else's benefit. It was to harm someone in an emotional way, but for some people, they may not do that. They may try to repress it. They may try to keep it to themselves. And that's also not good. You don't want to keep these thoughts repressed, because the more you do that and the more you try to contain it, eventually that container is going to pop. and then it's all going to come rushing out and flowing out. And then it's a huge mess that you have to clean. And the cleanup is not always the prettiest, I can't really speak from experience because that's not how, I was with my thoughts. There are certain things that, yes, I did keep repressed, right? From, childhood stuff. But when it came to, but that was more of, events that happened rather than thoughts. But it really takes a toll. It really does take a toll. And there's another panel where Musashi and this monk are walking, and he lifts up Musashi's arm in the air, and he says, "You carry everything right here." And he takes his two fingers and he puts them right where his heart would be. And it's so true. We truly do carry everything in our hearts, whether we realize it or not. And I think one of the beautiful things about getting into the spirituality, getting into that routine of meditation and doing everything that is involved in that, you start to learn that your mind is not necessarily who you are, and the thoughts that you have don't necessarily make you. And I know for some people there may be some resistance in that, and they may say, because a common thing that I get sometimes when I bring that up to people is well, how can you be you without your thoughts? Which is a totally valid question. And I always have trouble trying to explain it, because it's one of those things that sometimes it's harder to explain, right? Unless you've gone through some sort of traumatic experience. For myself, I've been through a lot of traumatic experiences, and it got to a point where I was just so tired of feeling that way that I know I needed to make a change. And when I was ready for that change, when I was ready for to start to work towards the change, that's when you start to realize, or at least that's when I started to realize, how much my mind works against me. And the things that I would think about, and how I perceive things, and the things that I would say, you start to really look at yourself in the mirror and really start to see why things are a certain way. And that's when I start to realize that my mind is just a tool. It's something that I use, right? But for a lot of people, their mind uses them. And some people, when they that walk around, everyday people that you see, you may see them at work, you may see them at school, you may see them, at the supermarket, you may see them at the bank, wherever. Their mind controls them. And until you start to learn to live with the heart, and until you start to embrace that, it's a hard trap to break out of. It's a hard thing to break out of, because our minds are so complex. There's so much that we don't know about our own minds, and it's important through spirituality, in my opinion. It's important through spirituality that we learn to slow down the mind, and that we learn how our minds work and what our experiences and the things that we went through. It's important how our minds got shaped throughout the years. I know I talked about generational pain, but that also shapes it, and the experiences and all the good experiences, all the bad experiences, all the identities that we've had, it shapes it. And going back to the manga, because I'm just riffing in and out, and there's another really good line, another really good passage, beautifully drawn too. It's just a single page, and he says, "Preoccupied with a single leaf, you won't see the tree. Preoccupied with a single tree, you'll miss the entire forest." So what that means to me is sometimes in life we get so caught up in the little things, right? We get caught up on, okay, for example, just a personal example. Financially, for myself, things are kind of tight, and I'm trying to save up as much money as I can right now, because I have intentions of moving. So I could be worked up on trying to find, just working, where are the hours, how, how stressed out am I going to be? I could play the tape, and I could let all the questions run through, right? But I know that deep down things are going to work out. I'm gonna work the hours that I can. I'm gonna continue to be financially disciplined, and week by week, until the certain deadline that I'm trying to meet, I will get there. I just need to be patient. And trying to think about how that relates to with the previous quote, because I think I got a little sidetracked. Personally, I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the little things that we miss the big picture. When we're looking at a picture or a painting, sometimes people, they'll see the picture, but they don't actually see it. Meaning they don't see the details that go into it. They don't see the effort that was put into it. And in regards to life, I feel some people get so caught up in the bills. They get so caught up in trying to find the right lover, trying to find the perfect family, the perfect house, the perfect car, trying to find the perfect income, trying to find the perfect place to live, trying to find, the next big thing, the next iPhone, trying to go viral, or, whatever it is that people seek. They get so caught up in those things that they almost forget to live. And I don't think people truly realize how short of a time we have on this earth. I remember the other day, I was thinking, I was at my job, and I think I was thinking about a movie or something. I was trying to figure out what year a particular movie came out, and I realized that it came out in the 80s. And I think it was like 84, around there. And then I started doing the math, and I was like, oh my god, that's almost 40 years ago. Like, the 80s was almost 40 years ago, which is like crazy to think about, depending on, which year it is. But, and, I remember like it was yesterday. I was just turning 18, and now I'm 26. And I think that it's just so important to, just to live, man. You know, be appreciative of life. Some people sometimes can feel so negative, and they can feel so down about life. That sometimes we take it for granted, and it happens to everyone. It's life isn't. Sometimes life doesn't go the way that we want it to be. It's not perfect. It can be messy. But I feel like every time we get knocked down, life gets us down. Yeah, sometimes you'll stay down for a bit, but it's important to get back up. And it's important to persevere. And that's what I try to do. There's stresses in life, yeah. But I always try to keep focus on the positive. Like, yeah, okay, maybe my job doesn't pay me as much as I want to, but hey, I have a job. I have a boss that appreciates me. I have coworkers that appreciate me. And this job keeps me fed. It pays my bills. And yeah, maybe I'm not saving as much as I want to, but hey, I'm still saving money. And those are positives. Those are huge positives. It helps me keep my place. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm very fortunate that I have like the strength, the mental strength, the physical strength. I'm still pretty young. Some people, they're not in that same, they're not in the same boat. And health is such an important thing to have. In this day and age, of course, it's a blessing that I'm healthy. Sometimes I take for granted that, I'm at like my physical, maybe I feel like I could be a bit more fit, but, it's not something to really worry myself over, And then one of the final pages, or one of the final pieces, or one of the final panels that I want to share, because I don't want to go too deep into the book, because I really do recommend people to read this book, or learn about the story, learn about it somehow. Maybe watch a YouTube video explaining it, because I think that this is like such an important read, and it really changed like my life. And one of the last panels I'll share, and again, this is the same two characters, Musashi and the monk. They're traveling together, and after the monk tells him the line about the trees and the leaf, he tells him, don't be preoccupied with a single spot. See everything in its entirety, effortlessly. That is what it means to truly see. And I think that's a really big one too, because see everything in its entirety effortlessly. I feel like sometimes we're not really, maybe not seeing, like not in a physical sense, I don't think he means like physically seeing, but I think it's meant to be more of a like a spiritual, like emotional sense, but more spiritual, like going back to before, I feel like sometimes, like, when I said that, when I saw something and I made a judgment on it, sometimes we don't take the time to really see things for what they are and how they are. And we automatically make assumptions on things. And I guess with this quote, and what it's trying to say is to not rush to judgment so quickly on things and how we see things. And the part where it says see everything in its entirety effortlessly, that one's like a bit of I guess like a paradox in a way, because it's like when we see things and how we see things, you know, you may think like you have to put so much effort in trying to actually really see things. And in a way, it's like, it's kind of hard to describe, because for myself, like, I understand that aspect. I understand like how to see things in its entirety effortlessly, right? But I don't do it all the time, because sometimes our minds rift in and out, or at least for myself, it rifts. So sometimes I am able to channel that spirituality, that effortless, you know, not judging people, that aspect. But sometimes, you know, life happens and experiences happen where it sways that. And to be able to truly see at every moment, I don't know if it's entirely possible, but for the moments that when it happens, when I do feel that way, when I do have zero judgments on just everything, like no expectations, zero judgments, just living life, like I love having those moments, because those moments feel so blissful. And I truly appreciate those moments when they come, because the peacefulness that you feel, no matter how long or short those moments may feel, just the fact that it has happened is such a beautiful thing. And I always try to keep that in mind, you know, when I go about my days, you know, just try to be the best version of myself that I can be. You know, if I can help someone along the way, you know, if I could help anyone with any little thing, you know, that'll be a huge thing for me. And what I love about this manga too, and this will be kind of like my closing statement. So the manga technically doesn't have an ending. It started out in 1998, and it officially went on hiatus in 2015. And for some people that may be a turn off. They may not want to read it. And to those people, I tell them, I think it's better to go on the journey and start it than to not have tried it at all. And I feel like they would be robbing themselves of a very truly of a very potentially spiritual moment, of a spiritual experience. And what I like about it is there is technically not an ending, but when the author was doing, he had like a showcase of his paintings in a museum, and he did a painting, it was, or a few like paintings that were technically like the ending to the story. So it wasn't the ending. Some people say it's the ending, but when you look up online, you'll start to see different things about it and what people say. But the story doesn't have an ending. And it's almost like a way of showing, like, at least in this moment, that sometimes in life we hit these huge bumps. And for myself, I've hit quite a huge bump. And at times it can be very hard to deal with the stress, to deal with the anxiety, to deal with the emotions, and to not feel overwhelmed. It can be pretty difficult, especially if you don't have anyone to support you, anyone to help you, anyone to just show that they care. But sometimes in life, we go through these experiences and these dark tunnels, and it almost seems as if, like, there's just no light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm here to tell you that there's always light. There's always a way out. When we put in a conscious effort to try to work towards a solution, there will always be light at the end of the tunnel. There's always people that can help. And there are good people in the world. You just have to find them. And sometimes for some people, they may suffer for a long time. But when you start the journey, when you start the path, when you start that road to trying to become a better you, you'll start to see that there are signs, there are showcases of there being hope. In people, in the things that you do, in your surroundings. And with that, I guess I'll leave you all. Thank you everyone for listening to another episode. If anyone has any suggestions on what they want to hear, please feel free to let me know, either in the comment section or messaging me. Because I want to make content that that you guys want to hear. And if you guys have any sort of questions, I will try my best to point you in the right direction. I'm not perfect in any way, shape, or form. I just talk about my experiences and what I've been through, and eventually my goal is to try to get people on here and to share their experiences, to share their journeys, just to showcase, like, that the road to becoming that better version of you can come in many different ways, but the end goal is always the same, is to become that change, to become the solution. We don't have to keep running away. We can live our life in peace and happiness. It just requires a little work. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you all in the next episode. Take care. God bless.